I agree with the entire Liberal caucus. I never thought I would find myself in the position of not just agreeing with one Liberal, but agreeing with the entire Liberal caucus.
Canadians are increasingly raising concerns about the sweeping powers contained in Bill C-22. Warrantless ISP access, subscriber information, metadata retention, increased government access to digital records. But maybe Canadians have nothing to fear because, according to the Liberals, this kind of legislation represents dangerous government overreach. Or at least that was their position 12 years ago.
Let's take a look.
When we subscribe for cable services, we do not surrender our expectation of privacy in respect of what we access on the internet, what we watch on our television sets, what we listen to on our radios, or what we send and receive by email on our computers. Likewise, when we subscribe for public services, we do not authorize the police to conscript the utilities concerned to enter our homes, physically or electronically, for the purpose of pursuing their criminal investigations without prior judicial authorization. We authorize neither undercover officers nor utility employees acting as their proxies to do so. End of quotation. I think that the issues that are raised in this legislation are significant. And let me just state for the record, Madam Speaker, because I think we all have to be clear on this issue. The purpose of the legislation is to extend the investigatory power of the police over methods of communication in the Criminal Code of Canada. So, Madam Speaker, this really has to do with extending the capacity, the power of investigation and intrusion into very extensive matters covering all methods and means of communication. Let's be clear. There are, under the current provisions of the Criminal Code, which have the support of all members of the House, we grant to our police officers and to our security officials under the CSIS Act, we grant them the power to watch what people are doing, and then if they feel that there's criminal activity underway, we grant them the power to go to a judge and ask the judge whether or not it is possible to intercept, in the case of the current criminal code, to intercept phone calls, other forms of communication. So no one on this side of the House is suggesting for a moment that it is somehow inappropriate in the circumstances where there are clear and probable grounds to believe that a criminal act is either being performed or is about to be performed, that it's inappropriate for the police to go and ask for the powers to look at what's happening. That is not inappropriate. And so it is important for every one of us to understand that the Charter, insofar as it has set out some of the protections for privacy and some of the concerns that that the House of Commons and the Senate had with respect to entrenching certain critical individual rights, and we are this spring celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Charter, it is important for us all to recognize that the Charter itself simply expresses and codifies what in effect has been the law of Canada, and indeed the common law throughout countries that follow the common law, and which applies, the criminal code applies to all of the jurisdictions in Canada, what in effect has been our jurisprudence for literally hundreds of years, which that there are limits on the powers of the state to intrude into the privacy of people's homes. And if you're going to break through that line and cross over that border and that frontier, you have to have the approval of the courts before you can do so.
Ladies and gentlemen, former interim Liberal leader Bob Rae. And behind him, you'll probably recognize two different individuals, one probably more than the other. Behind on our right, his left, the Liberal leader in waiting at the time, Justin Trudeau, and on his left, or on our left, his right, David McGuinty, current Minister of Defense. And David McGuinty was nodding, and the Liberal caucus was nodding, so they were agreeing with Bob Rae. You should have a warrant before you can access any information for Canadians with any type of communication device. That's what they're basically saying. And he's also arguing, and he used a Chief Justice's words to do it right at the beginning, that there's certain allowances that citizens of Canada put forward when we're looking at our privacy, and we allow certain, call it invasions of privacy, but we do so consciously. We do that when we're allowing the cable people in. We're doing a lot when we allow the telecom people into our house. There's even services where you can have your house monitored in terms of the air conditioning, and feed that data out.
Well, and for a quick example, even when I had to sign Vincent's permission slip to go onto a field trip, it had, all his information, his medical information, our phone numbers, my mom's phone number as an emergency contact. So you knowingly give those privacies up because you understand that the benefit of giving those privacies up outweighs the cost.
But you're volunteering to do so, and that's
Right.
very different. Now, here's another individual that you'll probably recognize. He's currently the Speaker of the House, but this is him 12 years ago on the exact same day.
Proponents of greater state surveillance say you have nothing to be worried about if you aren't doing anything wrong. But that attitude, apart from sounding like it comes from Big Brother's two-way television monitor, ignores the fact that individuals can suffer the consequences of surveillance even if they have done nothing wrong.
So I find this interesting. This is Francis Scarpaleggia, again, 12 years ago, current Speaker of the House. And I find it interesting. He says, well, supporters of state surveillance say you have nothing to worry about. And he even references George Orwell's 1984 and Big Brother. I find that incredible, considering that the Liberals are now putting forward C-22, which is far worse than the piece of legislation where they were actually discussing at the time. Far, far worse. But we continue.
Think of Maher Arar. Think of others who have been unjustly detained at the border or at airports and who are completely innocent. Surveillance technologies placed them in the wrong category, under the wrong tab, in the Big Brother database, even though they had nothing to hide. This is where modern surveillance technology can lead us if we are not careful to constrain and control it through good laws that protect our charter rights to privacy and our right to live in a healthy, free-thinking democracy. These new internet surveillance technologies can catch the innocent in its ever-expanding web. Christopher Parsons at the University of Victoria has described how this can happen. Consider the following scenario, and I'll quote because, quite frankly, I don't think anyone could have put it better. In college, university, or your private life, you communicate with individuals who once did or presently do agitate peacefully against certain state behavior. You might be aware of those individuals' behavior, or perhaps you know nothing about it. In any case, you engage in discussions with those people online, perhaps on a website where topics include opposition to certain state behavior, or maybe in the comments section of a newspaper article, or perhaps in some other format. If the police are interested in tracking those individuals who are invested in an issue, for instance, legalization of marijuana or protesting against federal decisions concerning Sri Lankan immigrants, and with whom you've been talking, your subscriber records could be requested along with those of all the other individuals who participated in the online discussion. Let's assume that you do not support opposing an official government position and aren't necessarily of real interest to authorities. Regardless, the police might request your subscriber data and that of everyone else engaged in these discussions. No warrant is required for authorities to request and receive this information. They would get the same information for every participant of the discussion. With this information, they can turn to the company that provided the email account as well as contact the ISP who provisioned the IP address at the specific time you posted your message. With information from the email provider, they might be able to definitely identify the ISP that you use, and from that, your name, address, and so forth. You will never know you were added to such a database because the service provider could not legally disclose that the information has been released, and as a result, your life prospects may change for legally associating and speaking with those who were similarly engaged in legal speech and discussion. Now, some will say that that's the end of my quote, Madam Speaker. Some will say that the police would never have, or some people would say they would never have these kinds of discussions online, only over the phone. Well, Bill C-30's provisions allowing the state to obtain 6 pieces of subscriber information without a warrant still leaves you, a law-abiding citizen, vulnerable. Say that you have a cell phone and you're downtown shopping. You happen to walk by a protest, say a G20 protest, and you stop with your friend to observe this because, you know, it's something that you don't see every day. Or you visited an Occupy camp or were a passive spectator in the 2011 Vancouver hockey riot. Your cell phone's identity may be captured by police. This can happen because police can use a technology known in the U.S. as a Stingray IMSI catcher, which is a piece of equipment that emulates a cell phone tower and captures IMSI numbers within several kilometers of the catcher. IMSI means International Mobile Subscriber Identity Number. This number can then be taken to a mobile phone provider and used under Section 16.1 of Bill C-30 to obtain your name, address, and Internet protocol number. In other words, you, the cell phone subscriber, can find your information sent to police and entered into a police database. And because of Section 23 of Bill C-30, the telecommunications service provider would be prohibited from disclosing to a subscriber that his or her basic subscriber information has been submitted upon request to a law enforcement agency.
It's very eerie hearing the Liberals speak against something like this. It's almost like in order to create Bill C-22, they went back and looked at these speeches and they said, hey, those are a lot of good ideas. Now, technology has advanced since then, so they've also said, you know what? Bill C-30 didn't go far enough. Bill C-30 allows police to get, 5 different, pieces of information on you without a warrant. Why do we need to limit that? Let's just go all the way.
Well, could you imagine, my friends from high school or grade school even getting put on some sort of list because they're friends with me on Facebook because I run Northern Perspective with Ryan? Like, this is insane.
The other thing that he talks about, again, you couldn't have scripted this any better. So this is 12 years ago. Sorry, this is 14 years ago. My mistake. 14 years ago. Almost 10 days to the day of the Freedom Convoy. Like, that's how eerie this is. This was on February 28th, 2012. And they're talking about, well, what if you're associated with a protest? And what if, like, this is kind of crazy hearing this. So the fact that the Liberals were so passionately defending the Charter. Remember, they're the party of the Charter, right? They keep invoking the Charter in here. Where are you invoking the Charter when it comes to C-22? If I listen to your arguments against your own bill, I would think that this bill is George Orwell's 1984. I would think that you're violating Canadians' privacy. I would think that Canadians should be very concerned about this. They use terms like government overreach. They use terms like state surveillance, invasion of privacy, privacy intrusion. Used all of these different words to describe this type of legislation, which isn't as bad as C-22.
Well, and the interesting thing, I think the main argument that I'm anticipating is going to be, well, Pierre Poilievre changed his mind in regards to his vote for not crossing the floor. And I think that's a very different situation just because floor crossing has always been allowed in the Westminster parliamentary system. And the reason one of the reasons, we did an entire video on this, but one of the reasons why I believe the Conservatives have changed their minds on it is because now members are actively being poached. We heard Marilyn Gladue be promised something, promised money for her riding, right? Or promised supports for her riding. She said it in an interview. So it's changed, right? The situation has changed. And now that it's changed, it requires new legislation. This situation regarding internet privacy, it's been the same for the last 14 years.
Well, and here's the other aspect of this, because when you go online and you talk about floor crossing, and you talk about how much the Conservatives are against floor crossing and want to support petitions to end it, you get all the Liberal supporters saying, well, Pierre Poilievre voted against this, when it was a bill. Okay. So if you want to take that stance, fine. What do you say to the Liberals opposing the exact legislation that they've introduced, except this is worse? What do you say, Liberal supporters? Because we're really interested in knowing what you actually have to retort. And the other thing that was fascinating about this day, folks, again, you cannot make this stuff up. Later in the day, Kevin Lamoureux, yes, he was still around, Kevin Lamoureux said this.
My question to the member is, this government has this nasty tendency to want to go into in-camera, which stops the public from being able to participate or listen in as to what is actually being talked about in committee. I'm wondering if this member can provide information to this House or assurances that the government will not have in-camera sittings during the discussions on this important bill when it goes into committee. Can he provide Canadians that assurance?
Interesting.
I would like to have that question posed by Kevin Lamoureux to Mark Carney and Mr. Steve McKinnon.
Because you know what? In that clip we just showed, he's right. Canadians deserve to know what is going on in our parliament. And when you have a government that is constantly going in camera for no discernible reason, that should be concerning for Canadians.
No, objectively, back then, if Stephen Harper's government was going in camera just to avoid any public scrutiny on bills and stuff like that, disagree with it. I can say that. I'm objective enough to say that. Yes, it's conservative, but I like to maintain consistent views. So, will Kevin Lamoureux stand up and maintain that consistent view? Will he stand up and ask his own government to ensure that when C-22, which is now actually being studied in committee, will you commit that it will never go in camera? I would love to hear that.
You know, we should write him a polite email including this clip.
We should.
We should.
Now, there's one more thing that I find crazy. It's that even CBC was against this bill. And a very loud Canadian voice at the time was the one leading the charge from the CBC against this bill. Just imagine that this video was released today.
My guess is if the average citizen was told that they had 5 minutes left to live and they were alone in their house, a good percentage of Canadians would devote 2 or 3 of those last minutes on Earth to erasing their hard drive. Not because they're criminal, but because it might contain something that's, what's the expression I'm looking for? Nobody's business. And that includes the Minister of Public Safety, Vic Taves. Now, Vic's a nice guy, but he's got this thing. He likes to peek, or at least he wants to peek into your hard drive. He wants to be able to get your computer's IP address without a warrant. He wants all of your computer online traffic recorded. It's his thing. Now, Vic says it's no big deal. It's like a phone book. Now, I trust Vic, I do, but I asked a computer geek friend of mine, and he says, no, it's nothing like a phone book. In fact, it's like a fingerprint, except it's a fingerprint that can tell Vic how much money you make, what you read, where you get your news, what you say to your best friend, what turns you on, and how you vote. Gee, is that all, Vic? Because that makes me uncomfortable.
Eerie.
Hard to believe that was broadcast how many years ago?
This was in 2012.
So 14 years ago.
14 years ago. In 2012. It's crazy to hear CBC's Rick Mercer using satire to kind of speak out against this. my question is, why doesn't CBC have shows that do this against the Liberal government?
Gee, I wonder.
Oh, right. 150 million extra dollars. That's why. Anyway, Rick wasn't done.
Canadians aren't that stupid. And thank God, because you can call us all the names you want, but that doesn't change the fact we're not going to let you peek. That doesn't make us criminal, it makes us Canadian. It's why we shut our blinds at night. The state has no business in the hard drives of the nation. You want to peek, convince a judge, get a warrant.
And that's exactly it. Convince a judge, get a warrant. You think something's going on that you need to invade that specific person's privacy, get a warrant.
I agree, Rick. I agree, Francis Scarpaleggia. I agree, Justin Trudeau. I agree, David McGuinty. I agree, Bob Ray. I agree, Heidi Fry. Like, these are all the people that were there arguing this, folks. I agree with the entire Liberal caucus. I never thought I would find myself in the position of not just agreeing with one Liberal, but agreeing with the entire Liberal caucus. Go Liberals, C22.
From 12 years ago.
From 14 years ago.
14 years ago.
Now, all joking aside, Canadians, this is where Canada needs you. So what we're going to be doing is we are going to be putting the links, as we always do, of the videos in this video in the description. And our request to you is to email as many Liberal MPs as you can and let them know that we don't agree with the Liberal position in 2026 when it comes to C22. We agree with the Liberal position on C22 that they had in 2012. As Rick Mercer said, if you want to invade the privacy of the average Canadian when it comes to a police investigation, get a warrant.